I'm one of the two co-chairs of PCEP. I want to welcome you to our April meeting. This is our first Zoom virtual meeting, so thank you all for bearing with us. We had to cancel our March meeting just due to everything going on. I hope this meeting finds you well. We would like to just give a thank you to all of our essential workers out there. I would also like to say that I believe really in my heart that everybody's essential, an essential worker, right, to their family. And so we know that there's a lot of folks that aren't able to work that would like to be, and just want to be thinking about everybody who's out there on the front lines, out there at home, wherever you are. You know, a lot of families were already hurting pre-COVID and are hurting even more present COVID. So just thinking about all of you and glad that you're able to join us. I am aware that we also are missing captioning for our interpretive services tonight. So just want to thank all of you who may be tuning in, who are utilizing those services, and just to bear with us on that. Our agenda today really focuses around our update from the compliance officer and community liaison. We'll also get an update from the Portland Police Bureau on updates about the Bureau in COVID-19, our subcommittee reports, and we also have a number of new members. So we'll start with that just as a roll call of who we have on a call right now. From PCEP is Vadim, Britt, Amy, Steve, Andre, Yolanda, Andrew, Marcia, and Taji. Elliot and Ann are not present, and Jamari's working at the moment, although I believe he should be on for at least part of the meeting. I would like to introduce one of our, well, actually we'll do three, because we've had a number of folks that were, two actually, a number of folks that were just appointed to the committee in February, at the end of February, and then also in March. So I would like to invite Andre and Taji to just give a few opening remarks, a couple things about yourself, maybe like organizations that you represent or things you're hoping to accomplish on PCEP.
Yeah, hi, this is Andre. I just want to say thank you to everyone. This is a great, I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to work with PCEP on behalf of the Portland community to help facilitate the relationship between Portland citizens and the PPB. And I'm an attorney, who currently in private practice, so I don't have a particular organization, but I like to think that we're all in this together.
Hey, sorry about that. I thought I was speaking, and I guess my thing was on mute. Thank you, Andre. Really glad to have you here. I did want to introduce Taj. I know you just had a question. If I did mean you, I did mean you, because I don't know if everybody has actually had a chance to meet you. I think this might be your first meeting actually at a general body meeting. I know you have been to other subcommittee meetings and stuff, made a few statements in February as well. But the floor is yours if you would like to say anything else. And you're still muted.
Cool. Yeah, this is actually my second general meeting, but I can still just give a quick introduction for the folks. Is my mic working and everything? Yeah, okay, cool. For folks who have not been able to meet with me or hear about any of my work, my name is Taji Chesanet. I am currently senior, I guess, graduated from De La Salle, North Catholic in North Portland. I'll be attending the University of Chicago next fall, but in Portland, I currently run an organization with another PCEP member called Youth Educating Police. We work to decrease animosity with police officers and young people, and we do that through community-based curriculum development work. And I've been doing that since my sophomore year of high school. I've been involved with PCEP in an official capacity as a member, I believe, since February, working in the youth subcommittee. Yeah. Let me know if you want anything else.
Okay, I'm unmuted. I think it would be helpful for the just a note to the staff if you could give us a little more control over unmuting ourselves, because we keep getting, I'm not able to unmute myself, and I would like to. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're actually gonna get an update from the Portland Police Bureau regarding
Actually,
COVID.
sorry. I'm sorry, Lakiana, we need to do some, we need to just do some Zoom instructions for folks.
Yep.
Before you do that, thanks.
Thanks. This is Theo Lada, PCCEP staff. Just a few housekeeping items before we get too in depth. For if you're using ASL services, the interpretation services, you can see those folks providing those services right now. If you scroll over them, there's going to be an ellipses that you can click on. Click on that and you can pin that video, and that will be the only video that you see. So you can follow along with us by watching the sign. If you want to speak, like we said, we can go through Judith or we can go through Claudia, and they will let me know and I will call on you. We are, please keep your sound off, as most of you have been. If you forget to mute yourself, then we're just gonna go ahead and mute you, and then we'll go through that. In the participant box, use the raising your hand feature, and then we'll hold your place in line when you want to speak. If you are willing, please turn off your video if you're not a PCCEP member or interpreter. That will help streamline the process. Judith, yeah, right there. You can use the chat box to communicate the needs and whatnot to other staff members. Please say who you are when you speak, since some people will be on the phone and unable to see who the speaker is. Open Signal is making sure that the meeting is going to be live streamed on YouTube, so that will be good. The updates from PPB are going to be really COVID-19 specific. We're going to have other time to talk more in depth about the stuff that they're talking about or their respective units, but for this particular meeting, it's going to be COVID-19 specific. There's still going to be time for public comment in everything that we're doing, but just bear with us. This is our first meeting, and we'll get to you. We'll make sure that we get to you. And yeah, if you're, as always, if you're interested in being or joining a subcommittee, then we're always looking to have you on that subcommittee. Yeah, thanks.
Theo, did you mention about dropping out of video if you're not on the committee?
I did.
Yeah, good. And then just everybody see where the raise hand function is? Because we'll be watching for that, both for public comment but the members will be unmuted. Thank you.
What was that?
We're good to go?
Okay, we're good, Lakiana. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. And then I guess I would just ask, if you are speaking, whenever you do speak, if you could turn your video back on, because that helps us put names to faces. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to the Portland Police Bureau to have their representatives give us an update regarding COVID-19 and the Bureau's stance on that. You want to share your screen?
Are they talking or what?
Chris, if you are presenting, your microphone is off.
Everybody's microphone is off.
So if you can, I for the sake of this, I unmuted everybody just now. So if you are not speaking, please mute your microphone. And whoever's speaking, you can share your screen by scrolling over the bottom bar. You can share screen.
Why don't we do this while we're waiting for it? We're going to switch our things around. We'll go to committee reports and allow the Bureau to get their stuff together. So we're going to turn over to subcommittee reports. I just ask that the chairs keep the remarks brief just so we can keep this meeting timely. Why don't we start with the youth subcommittee?
Sure, and Taji and I will be giving an update today. Hello, everyone. In terms of old business that we shared previously, we met outside of our normal meeting time to finish, to keep working on the existing proposal of a survey for PPS schools. I don't know if this update we shared last time, but it's probably also assumed that because of COVID, we had to suspend our initial plans to unveil that or to release it to schools this year. But the IRB process or board has informed us that we can resubmit that survey to them this summer and or whenever things subside a little bit. So we still have that in the works, and we did meet to make sure we had a plan in place for when we're able to resubmit that, and thinking about specifically not only what questions we're going to propose, which we sort of already had, but also making sure that we had a plan for afterwards, for after we gather data and what we want to do with that. So that was like old business that we just continued. We also have a few new things in the works. Number one, we put together an official mission statement for our subcommittee, and I actually will share that right now. It's still a draft version, but we think that it speaks to the work that we're doing. So it reads as: the PCCEP Youth Subcommittee aims to address existing tensions between young people and the Portland Police Bureau by helping to build healthy and sustainable relationships through youth-centered engagement and by making space for shared dialogue. And so as part of that mission statement, we also wanted to construct a number of goals that we could achieve here in the short term as myself and Taji and other current members of the youth subcommittee finish our terms and potentially go off to college whenever that happens. But that would also set up new members for success going into the new year. So here are some of the goals that we have. Number one, to finalize submission materials for the survey that I talked about and make sure that that process goes smoothly. So submitting it, actually overseeing the process of having it out in schools, and then again, the sort of final component of looking through the data and turning that into some type of policy recommendation. So we want to make sure that process goes smoothly. That's our first goal. Second, identifying other young people to sit on the PCCEP, so replacing like official roles, but then also just to be engaged with our work generally. And we're thinking about using some of the community engagement funds that have been provided to various subcommittees to help with that process. So to do some type of community events or whatever with young people to help inform them about the work and then to get their input for the work that we're doing. So that's our second goal. And then finally, and Taji's going to talk more about this, but right here in the short term, with the COVID hiatus, we're actually working on a number of policy recommendations in collaboration with NYC and some other groups. So I'll turn it over to Taji to talk about that last goal and what we're doing.
Yeah, just really quickly, we are working on 2 recommendations with the Multnomah Youth Commission. The first one has to do with restorative justice policy, and then the second, and we're just giving general titles right now, but the second is we're actually going to most likely, hopefully, work in conjunction with the Racial Equity Subcommittee on some sort of audit and review process and specific points on the current status of their current community engagement that they have. So through all of their respective advisory councils, and then looking at as their future community engagement, what that could look like as well. So that's still in the beginning stages, but yeah.
And so I don't know if you mentioned Taji, but we also we have a meeting this week with NYC and some other things in the works to make sure that gets done, in the short term, and we hope to present some of these recommendations in the next couple of meetings. That's it for us, Lockiana.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I wasn't able to unmute myself. Appreciate that. I'm going to turn it over to Marcia and the Racial Equity Subcommittee. You're also muted.
Okay, thank you. So we met last week. We talked about, let's see, was it last week, 2 weeks ago now, April 16th, and we also continued the conversation around prioritizing and priority setting top issues we want to tackle in this group. We also reviewed the PBB racial equity plan and figured out what ways, what areas there we can intersect. We talked about the highest priorities, and Marlon was able to give a presentation that we then discussed and debriefed for quite some time. We're also working on a community engagement plan, so we're hoping to get that out by sometime in May, at least by our next meeting, exploring ways that we can use funds for community engagement. We talked about things like using it as a stipend, figuring out how to get people access to different community engagement activities we'd like to promote. So we're waiting on some feedback around that, and then. I also connected with the youth subcommittee. We talked about just the intersections of the different works that we're doing. And really, I think at least for the racial equity committee, it's really focusing on building capacity with things that are already in place. So rather than just creating new things, I really want to learn more about what the current advisory councils are doing, what's working, what can be improved, and then figure out how PCCEP can help influence that, participate, or figure out how we can help drive that work because of the different committees that exist already in the different communities. So next steps I'll be continuing to work with the youth subcommittee and continue to work on the community engagement plan with both Lakiana and Marlon and a few others. Lakiana, do you have any updates that you want to add since you attended that as well?
No, if you could just explain who Marlon is, and then for everybody else giving reports, if you have like specific people, if you can just let them know, or any acronyms, just so general people can jump in on that.
Marlon just got a new title that I forgot, so can you explain what?
Yeah, he's the racial, maybe it's not in the racial equity, but it's the bureau's, I think it is the racial equity director. Correct. I'm pretty sure whatever their title is for that group of stuff, it might even go beyond race, but that's his title. He heads that kind of stuff up.
Yeah, he humbly did not include his title in the report, in the PowerPoint that he provided us. But you, for those of you interested, that's on the meeting minutes that put on there, and then we will continue to have those dialogues around kind of what's going well and how do we build capacity around the work that we're doing, so we're not duplicating into the efforts that have already taken place. So folks have feedback on that.
Thank you, Captain Lavelle. He upped this equity inclusion manager.
Cool.
Anything else, Marcia, from your report? Are we good?
I think we're good right now. Yeah, that's all I have.
Okay, sounds good. We'll turn it over to the Behavioral Health Subcommittee.
We had a pretty robust meeting. Andre and Ann joined the subcommittee, as well as Amy, the chair, were there. We also had 17 participants from the public that attended. We spoke with people who had been on the committee before to understand, where people were coming from, and try to at least reconcile for the time some of the issues that had arisen in the past. And we discussed the need for openness and communication within the committee and between PCCEP and the subcommittee. So we intend to do that and discuss any kind of recommendations in the process at every meeting. We also had a discussion about working with the Training Advisory Council on issues that are affecting people experiencing mental health and behavioral health issues, and some of the challenges they might have interacting with the police bureau. So we scheduled a meeting for May with Training Advisory.
Can we turn the sound on?
Training Advisory
My headphones
Council.
died. Can we turn the sound on?
Okay, with Sean Campbell, who's the chair of the Training Advisory Committee. Also, we had people from the Behavioral Health Unit attend. As you might recollect in the past, there was a desire from the community to have more openness with the Behavioral Health Unit Advisory Committee.
No, I did not have any problem. Okay, bye.
So we had Lieutenant Hatman, who's the officer in charge, as well as Janie Gullickson, who was the co-chair, attend the meeting, and they informed us they'd be happy to attend our subcommittee meetings and give us updates on what they've been doing, help answer questions on behalf of community members that might have an interest in what the behavioral health BHAUAC is doing. And also for us to give updates to PCCEP as a whole on anything that might be affecting community outreach. BHUAC is working on their own community engagement plan, and we hope to partner with them and help them reach out to the community and work with them to get input from community members as well. Thank you. Amy, would you have anything to add?
Yeah, we had a really robust meeting, and we talked about a lot of different things. Going forward, we're going to really focus on community engagement and how to best engage the different communities. And we too have been reviewing, I've been reviewing the different advisory committees out there, what everybody's got going on. And I think it sounds like we're all kind of succinct to that particular scenario. So I would like to see some of our funding go towards doing an additional video chat during the middle of the month or at some point during the month that would include officers and from various precincts and invite the community to come have conversations about what works well, what do they think needs improvement, and kind of learn from the police what they're experiencing in this environment, since each of the precinct areas are so different around Portland. I think it's really important that we hear from the each individual section, and yeah, we're going to have a lot of good conversations going forward.
Thank you, Amy and Vadim, for that. I saw a lot of head nods and things of that nature. So just want to give you guys a big salute for just being able to kind of make that transition with the committee and get folks re-engaged and kind of continue on the work. That's awesome to see. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew for the Settlement and Policy Subcommittee update. Andrew needs to be unmuted.
Yep, thank you very much. So we have spoken about our subcommittee's community engagement plan. Each of the last 2 months, we took feedback from the March meeting to build out a sort of quick and simple one-page plan. We took further comment on that this month to refine it further and have it in final form for next month. Lots of great ideas. So thanks to the committee members and also members of the public who have been joining and sort of sharing your wisdom about how we can better engage on a wide variety of topics, but particularly engaging the community more deeply about the data that is currently available online and otherwise, and how we can better analyze that data and dive into it to see trends and identify additional areas for inquiry. But not just data, of course. The Settlement Agreement Policy Subcommittee's agenda is very broad, and so we have a number of ideas in that in our community engagement plan that should help to bring the wisdom of folks together on a wide variety of topics. So thank you all for your input on that. This month we also spoke, and we'll speak about it more tonight, about some of the unique policy issues that may be confronting the Bureau, but more importantly, I think the city during the crisis, and how we can or may influence how policy is made on the fly here. No one this century anyway has policed in a pandemic. And so it's something that is something of a trial by fire. We learn as we do, and so we'll continue to be in close contact, of course, with the police bureau about that, but also listening intently to the community to see if there are any issues that they identify in terms of how policing is happening in this very strange era. So that is the report from Settlement Agreement and Policy. Thanks.
Appreciate that, Andrew. I can give the update on the steering committee. We met back on the 14th of April, talked about how we transition as a committee to the Zoom virtual meeting protocols. One of the things you all heard from each of the subcommittees was this community engagement strategy that was being alluded to. Each subcommittee, per our new budget, which is still kind of up in the air considering the current climate that we're in and possible budget cuts, but each subcommittee will be getting roughly $2,500 to go towards community engagement efforts, whether that be hosting a movie or putting together a meeting or other flyers or whatever kind of project each of the subcommittees determines based on effort to engage the community more. And so we basically set a timeline, have the subcommittees be on the behavioral health subcommittee to make an updated plan by May. And then in June, once some other reports and things have come out and we get closer to the new fiscal year, we make a final determination on what that money can be used for. And then we prepped for this meeting, and then also talked about having more communication between the subcommittees and the steering committee by having like a rep from each subcommittee be at the meeting. Most of the subcommittees have someone there, so it doesn't necessarily have to be the chair of each of the committees, but we want to increase that communication between the groups. And that's what I got for the steering committee. If there's anything, Andrew, you want to add to that? No. Okay.
Nope.
Cool.
You said it best.
Oh,
Thanks.
you good? Okay, great. So I'm gonna move to public comment. It's 6:07 just for a time check, so we're a little bit behind, but we'll open it up for about 4 minutes of any questions from the community on any of the subcommittee reports. Please use the hand raise button on your device, whatever you're using. If you can't, then just raise your hand, throw your video on, and I'll kind of have Theo or Claudia help figure out who's gonna be first.
I don't see any hand raises, Lakiana.
Okay, yeah, I just want to give people a second. I know that you might be trying to figure out videos or things of that nature. Going once, going twice.
Lakiana, we have a bunch of people on the phone. If you're on the phone, Theo, will people be able to unmute themselves to talk if they're on the phone?
Yes, I unmuted everybody. So if we hear background noise or anything like that, then I'll just go over and do the individual mutes. But everybody is unmuted. If you need to unmute yourself and you're on the phone, press *6, and that will unmute you. Otherwise, just raise your hand or.
Oh, I see Trebby does have her hand up.
Go ahead, Trebby.
I just want to say how impressed I am with all the subcommittees, how no one has lost the power of momentum in this crisis. I'm really impressed. I was thinking like maybe things might have slowed down, but they didn't. So I just want to say like how impressed I am as a community member, how everybody is doing so much work in such a crazy time. So I really appreciate everybody's work.
Appreciate that, Trebby, and appreciate your support. Any other public comments?
Do you have anything you want to say? No.
Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to the Portland Police Bureau again. Let me just check my Okay, so it looks like I'm actually turning over to Craig Dobson to do this report.
No.
So Craig, if you're there.
No.
It's not,
like
it's
it should
not
be
Craig.
Mary Claire.
Okay,
Mary
it's
Claire.
Mary Claire. Okay. Yeah, and Mary Claire, you're currently muted right now.
Okay,
So
sorry.
everyone should be unmuted. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Luckiana, Officer Curtis Pack is with you, as well as Sergeant Dulio. So
Okay.
I'll pass it on to them.
Perfect, thank you.
Hi, I'm Officer Pack. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. So as a patrol officer, I've noticed that certain calls went down quite a bit, such as shoplift calls, criminal mischief calls. Petty crimes definitely went down. However, certain calls went up, such as welfare check, people asking for food box, also homeless and unwanted call has gone up. I noticed that people, they're calling about homelessness, seems very much more frustrated with the situation right now. So those are things that I've seen when I worked the patrol at North.
Thank you, Officer Pack. Sergeant Dulio, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'm Kenneth Dulio, Sergeant with the Gun Violence Reduction Team for our update. And so as far as COVID related, we initially, when I say initially, when the pandemic kind of first hit America, the governor issued the stay-at-home order. We initially saw a very nice dramatic drop in shootings. Very refreshing for our unit, as the rate of shootings started off really high in January. After about I'll turn my radio off. After about 2 weeks, we saw this spike in shootings, and it lasted about 2 weeks, and we saw 30 shootings in about 14 days. And then it's been pretty steady since. To give you some numbers, last year at this time, we had responded to 128 shootings. This year at this time, we've responded to 167. So up from 128 to 167. Last year, there had been 19 people hit by gunfire at this point. This year at this time, there's been 37 gunfire. The good news in this, that is not the good news, but the good news in this is last year at this time, we had 8 homicides by gunfire. This year, we've had 1 or 2. We weren't sure on the numbers. I tried to look it up before this meeting, but fewer people have been murdered by gunfire, and that doesn't include some of the suicides. Up to this point, since January 1st, we've collected over 800 casings. We've had quite a few shootings where it involves multiple people shooting, sometimes 30 to 40 casings, multiple calibers, stuff like that. And some of those shootings are the ones that we categorize as repeat shooters, and some of them are gang affected, and those kind of continue. What else for the updates? Our unit has recovered, I think, just a little over 50 firearms to this point. And a lot of those are by our uniform patrol team, where they're individual, like vehicle stops, where they're, searching the city, trying to locate the people that we suspect are involved in these shootings. Many of these firearms come back to other shootings, and the subjects have felony convictions, so they get charged in addition with the crime of felon in possession of a firearm. I think that is, well, I guess the other thing is for us, regardless of the pandemic or not, I mean, we're still working every day doing our job. And so nobody should think, as far as the public, that, you know, we're kind of sitting on the sidelines. We're certainly not. We're taking the necessary precautions. We wear the N95 mask. Our officers wear eye protection gloves when they're contacting people, when they're out on crime scenes. But, you know, it's not, hasn't reduced our ability to go out there and try to get ahead of this and try to reduce some of these shootings. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, both of you officers, for that. I'm going to turn it over to PCCEP comments. Any questions from PCCEP members to PPB, and then we'll open it up for public comment following that.
I have a question, Steve Trujillo. Just for the sergeant, any working theories on why it upticked, you know, this year at this time versus last year? Is there maybe a growing frustration, people getting antsy sitting at home and just there's more trouble? Because I just want to kind of hear what you guys just have working theories of why. Are there more turf wars with gangs, or, you know, what do you guys think is the reason for the uptick on the gun violence?
Very good question. We in the unit and myself, I get asked that a lot. We do a lot of media interviews, and that's something a lot of people want to know. You know, we certainly have ideas and thoughts and theories, and some based on experience, but nothing like real empirical data on why. Before the pandemic, in January it was cold and raining. We actually set unfortunately a record for the most shootings since we went to this new model, which we're now, you know, almost a year and a half into, where we take all shootings. So don't know why. It is concerning and alarming. But I'm sure, as we all know, there's a lot of different factors that come into play.
Other PCCEP comments. I see Amy's hands up. I see Andrew's. We'll go with Amy and then Andrew.
Thank you. One of my questions is, how many of the current cases that you encounter are meth related, as far as the violence and possibly the gun shootings? How much do you think of that as drug related? To whoever wants to answer.
Yep,
One of the officers?
I can answer that. Sorry, I'm not allowed to immediately unmute my mic, so I had to wait for the permission to do it. You know, there are a fair amount of shootings that are drug related. I don't have those numbers in front of me. I do know that, you know, there's a lot of shootings we go to where everybody leaves the scene. And so you investigate it later and you start to put the pieces together. But there's a huge in this unknown category. But certainly, you know, there's people that meet to do drug transactions. Something goes bad, firearm comes out, shots are fired, and we do certainly have a fair share of those. So the numbers that I gave you, like the 167 for the year, just so you know, that covers everything. If there's a shooting related to a robbery, related to gang or group activity, related to a domestic violence incident, related to drug activity, that covers all of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
For sake of time, we're going to go with Andrew as the last PCCEP question here.
Thank you. You mentioned that there was seemingly additional frustration coming from callers who were concerned about members of the community who might be houseless. Can you give us a little bit more detail on what you mean by that? It was certainly our understanding, even prior to the crisis, that there was frustration in some corners about that. And so I'm curious the sort of nature of that frustration. And then secondarily, and perhaps interchangeably, what have you been receiving calls from community members who are concerned about people who are perhaps congregating together in a way that they view as in violation of the mayor or governor's stay-at-home orders? Thanks very much.
I guess now that people are home after that stay-home order was issued, a lot of them have their kids at houses, and I know this one citizen was really concerned about the kids. You know, there are people doing drugs down there where there are homeless people are, and I think the concern was their kids. I think that's why they're a little more frustrated versus they go to work, they go to school, they come home. Now these kids are home, and I think that's one reason why some citizens are a little bit more uh, upset at the situation. Um, I haven't had much problem about people congregating. Usually when I go and talk to those citizens, they understand and they kind of walk off. So it's like, so far from my experience, when I go and talk to people who congregated, they tend to walk off and they separate themselves. So I haven't had much problem with those incidents where people were against, me asking them to separate themselves.
Okay, we're gonna open it up to 3 questions from the public related to this, specifically to the COVID-19 situation, just to keep us on topic for each of the officers. So community members, it's you got the floor. I got a question from Ann Bradfield. Actually, I think that's one of our members, but let's go with it. Are wellness classes still continuing during the crisis?
Can you hear? Yeah. If you're referring to the wellness program for the police bureau, which is pretty new. It's in its kind of a year trial phase, which I think is a great thing that the bureau moved to it. When the governor issued her stay-at-home order and some of the restrictions around activities, one of them was shutting down gyms. And so we have a workout facility, a gym in each of the precincts, and we complied with that order and we've shut ours down. So we're not currently practicing the wellness program right now.
Thank you. I got a question from Dan Handelman. If you want to unmute yourself, and then we'll take one final question after that.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, I muted myself again. So this is Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch, and I raised this question at 2 subcommittee meetings, but I want to raise it here at the general meeting too. We would like to see whether the police can gather up data on who's getting warned, who's getting cited, and who might eventually get arrested under the stay-at-home orders. So far, we have only seen one arrest in Oregon, which was 2 white dudes who jumped a fence to go surfing in Lincoln City, but we're very concerned that the police have very disparate numbers for African Americans in every other category, and we're worried that any enforcement of this will be against A, people of color, and B, people who are houseless. So I'm wondering if the Bureau is going to do anything to track those warnings and citations and arrests.
I don't know if I'm the best to answer that, but from our chief, the direction is that we're not first looking to do enforcement. It would just be like encouragement, to kind of break up big parties, those sort of things. I am not aware of any citations being issued by the police bureau for that. I do know that kind of gets to what you're asking a little bit, which I disagree with. I appreciate your concern, but we had a shooting. We conducted follow-up through the investigation to develop probable cause to make an arrest. We went to stop a vehicle. Multiple people bailed from the vehicle. We set up containment, and we had a 3 or 4 hour block search. Those individuals were taken into custody. It came up that obviously they weren't complying with the governor's order. Because of their race specifically, it was discussed how that could look bad and look negatively on the Bureau. And so we did not cite or charge any of those subjects with that. Instead, we just stuck to the shooting investigation.
This is Ryan Lee. I'm the assistant chief over the services branch. And so from a record standpoint, to your point, Mr. Handelman, we've got a specific code so that we can go back and track if there is an arrest or a citation related to COVID-19, the governor's orders, and the section under the health code and the law that we would be using to enforce that. It should be, if it's coded properly, there might be some ability for just mere contacts and stops. But for citations and arrests, if there are any, and to my knowledge, at least as of this morning, there hadn't been any by the police bureau, we will be able to extract that data on the back end to include, the standard information that we'd be able to pull out from sort of any stop or contact. So we are concerned about that. We do want to make sure that we are aware of it. We are operating on an education and an encouragement first sort of model to try and get people to understand the severity of it and to try and get people to voluntarily comply. And then I saw a question related to wellness programs I just wanted to address really quickly. We do have some wellness programs that do not involve the gym. As we can with the requirements for social distancing, we're allowing those to continue. So like mindfulness, 20 minutes of mindfulness or meditation, if we can find places where we can still maintain social distancing, we're allowing officers and members of not just the officers, but members of the police bureau to do it because we recognize the sort of exceptional stress this time is putting on folks. So I just wanted to cover those 2 points for you.
Thank you for adding to that, Chief. We'll take one more question. I just want to circle back to Dan. I see your hand, Trebi. I want to circle back to Dan's thing. If you do want to bring that up, I know you've mentioned it in a couple of meetings, but I think it would be great to touch base with me and Marcia. I think that there is maybe something we can talk about in the racial equity subcommittee about that, if that's something we want to ask as more data and transparency, specifically related to COVID. I think that's definitely a thing. Trebi has the last question, and then we are going to move into a 5-minute break.
I just want to comment on Officer Pack when he mentioned people calling about food boxes. And I just want to do a shout out to Sunshine Division for all the people that they have taken care of during this crisis. I think it's like 6 times more than what they normally do. And so I just want to acknowledge that because that is a huge thing. A lot of families, it's their meals for the week. So I want to acknowledge the officers that are doing that. And also just to say thank you for all the officers, the extra stress they're under during this time period. It's a lot.
Thank you, Trebi. I would also, just like to echo that. Thank you to the service of all the officers that are putting their health and their family's health on the line at this time. We appreciate your service and appreciate you being here this evening. We're going to move into a 5-minute break. So I got 6:29 right now. So at about 6:34, 6:35, we will reconvene. Feel free, PCCEP members, to turn off your cameras if you need to grab water, go to the bathroom, whatever you got to do. And we'll see you back in a little bit. Signal and LNS captioning. Open Signal's doing all the audio control stuff so that we can all be on this call. And then LNS captioning's doing the interpreting, I believe, via words, from lack of better terminology there. And then we also have 2 sign language interpreters on as well. So appreciate them for being and helping with the tech support. Andrew, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Lakiana. And Theo, do you want to speak a little bit more about what folks need to do technically to access those services?
That's right. If you're using the ASL services right now, or if you're using the ASL interpreters right now, we're going to do the screen sharing from the compliance officers. And once they hit the screen share on their end, you may need to repin the video if you're using the interpretation. So it'll go off automatically, and then it'll just be the compliance officer screen, and you may need to repin that video. And then you should be good to go. That's all I got. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Theo. And Andre, I see your note about Zoom not letting you turn your camera back on. I don't know why that would be, but we will try to figure it out. And if not, at least we know you're back. So thank you.
Andrew.
There we go. At least we can hear you. So we are now moving into the presentation and town hall from our compliance officers. Dr. Rosenbaum, I don't know if you want to lead the way here, but for folks who want to follow along at home, the compliance officer's latest report is linked in the PCCEP agenda, and I will put the URL in the chat so that you can access it if you haven't seen it already. Dr. Rosenbaum, take it away.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Great, thank you. Tom, Christoph, and I, Dr. Christoph, are going to give a brief summary of the report. We do encourage you folks to read it if you get a chance, or at least the executive summary. And there'll be tonight, we're open to some comments and questions at the end of our presentation. And also, I think our PowerPoint slide at the end will show you where you can go to make comments before, I believe it's January, or excuse me, May 8th, I believe. So thank you. This is great. You guys are doing some awesome work here, and we really appreciate it. For those of you who are uncertain about our work, we do, as the compliance officer, we make sure that the City of Portland and the Portland Police Bureau are in compliance with the settlement agreement, which we've done 5 years of that already, and we're in the 6th year. Tom, are you available, and do you have the PowerPoint that we were going to show? I don't know if we can do that.
Should be able to share this.
There we go. Good. So why don't we go to the second screen? And here we're in a maintenance year now, and many of you probably know what that means, but just real quickly, on January 10th of this year, the Department of Justice concluded that the city was in substantial compliance with the terms of the settlement agreement. And that's consistent with our assessment last year in October, November, when we reached that conclusion. But the settlement agreement requires that they stay in substantial compliance for at least 1 year, and that's called the maintenance year. And after 5 years, we're now in the 6th year, and this is the maintenance year. And to remain in substantial compliance, basically the Portland Police Bureau and the city can't have anything major go wrong. There can be minor or occasional deviations or violations, but as it says here, they can't be systemic, excuse me. And so that's paragraph 175A of the settlement agreement. And so our job here is, has the city remained in substantial compliance this year? And are the remedies that and reforms that were put in place, are they still there and are being functioning sort of much at the same level? And so that's the question we ask. This is our first quarterly report covering January through March of 2020. And so it's the first report we've done during the maintenance year. So Tom, do you want to go on to the next slide? This report covers all sections of the settlement agreement. You know, a lot of our last reports were covering specific components because that's what was due at that time. That's how we structured it. And we agreed on to do it with the DOJ and the city. And so basically the kind of questions we're asking here, has this PPB and the city sustained the systems that are needed for reform? And they're clearly systems that we've talked about in our reports repeatedly about training and accountability, all these supervision and auditing and early intervention, you name it. And have they continued to collect data and analysis of that data to identify problems and trends and provide feedback? As any good learning organization would do, you've got to monitor yourself with good data. And when you find a pattern or a trend that's problematic, you've got to give that feedback to the appropriate employees, and you have to do something about it. And that's the last part. Have they continued to make adjustments as needed when issues develop? All right, Tom, I think, are we on to, Tom's going to talk about use of force and some other things. I'll come back and talk about training. We'll go back and forth here. So thank you. Dr. Christoph, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. Can everyone hear me? Oh.
Yes, we can, Tom.
Okay, perfect. So I'll talk about Section 3, use of force. And like Dr. Rosenbaum said, I think one of the things that we really evaluated in this report was whether the systems that PPB has implemented remain in effect. So one of these things, one of the components of an effective system are directives. So PPB have maintained their directives regarding use of force, including the legal basis for when force is appropriate, as well as the post-force requirements, one of those being the report writing. So we've talked about the force audit a number of times throughout the last 5 years. And what we stressed was that force reports should be comprehensive enough so that supervisors can evaluate the force decision-making process to determine whether the force was in or out of policy. And so PPB implemented a force audit to make sure that when officers complete FDCRs, which are force data collection reports, and when sergeants do their evaluation, their after action reports, that all that information is there for them to make a complete evaluation. And so one of the things that we reported on this report was PPB is consistently finding that officers are providing complete force reports. The 0.22 deficiencies per FDCR means out of, I believe it was 38 points that officers are required to report on, it would take approximately 5 FDCRs before a single deficiency would be made. That's what that 0.22 means. Sergeants, they consistently provide complete evaluations. Again, 0.8 deficiencies per after action. And that includes not only the things that sergeants are required to report on, but also making sure that officers included all the things that they're required to. Same thing with command staff. You'll see the 1.5, but again, that includes all points of evaluation for officers and sergeants. So what we determined was that officers are consistently, officers and supervisors are consistently providing the complete reports. We also look at how PPB evaluates trends in force. So not only when officers reported, but looking at all those reports and identifying trends. And so one of the things that the force inspector does is conducts quarterly meetings with RU managers in each precinct, looks at reporting deficiency trends like we just talked about, looks at individual officers who may use force more than others, may use a certain type of force more than others. They discuss group trends with respect to those data points, precinct trends. And after that discussion, the RU manager is required to provide a formal response to each of the identified trends. On top of that, the force inspector also conducts a review of force cases to look for training implications, personnel implications, or policy implications. In this last quarter, the force inspector identified 2 potential training issues. They were sent on to the training division. The training division is reviewing those. The force inspector also referred 1 allegation of excessive force to internal affairs, as well as sent 5 potential administrative violations to IA. So we're seeing that the force inspector is looking at trends, and then when an issue is identified, taking that action, documenting that action, and making sure that whatever referral was made, whether it be training division or the policy team, that a response is given so that they're always getting that constant feedback and nothing's falling by the wayside. And then finally, we just, as part of our report, we looked at the overall use of force, individuals and force to custody ratio. So what this chart here shows is that in the 2018 Q1, there was a 4.61 for every 100 custodies. There was 4.61 uses of force, and this was right around the time that PPB expanded their definitions of use of force. Since then, there has been a drop off. So this 2018 Q3 was 2.98. And since 2018 Q3 to the present, to 2019 Q4, there's been an approximate 3% to 3.5% force to custody ratio. And so that maintenance indicates that there hasn't been any wild fluctuations. There's been a general acceptable force to custody ratio ongoing and maintained. And now I'll hand it off to Dr. Rosenbaum to discuss the training.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So, again, back to my point about systems, that the PPB has to continue doing certain fundamental things that we considered essential, but are good for a solid, sound training program in policing. And these are the questions that we ask each time and that we look into and evaluate, and here are the answers. We, have they identified areas where officers require training and developed a training plan? Well, that requires they have done a comprehensive needs assessment. They have used a lot of sources to do that, local and national, and also looking at some of the force data that Tom was alluding to earlier. And looking at national trends. Suicide among police officers was a problem, and that and other forces contributed to officer wellness training. And crowd management has been an issue in Portland, especially. It has more protest issues in many cities, and so there's some very strong training developed around that. So it wasn't just random stuff. And then they continued to do the work that we've been stressing on responding to mental health calls. So they have done that. They delivered high quality training there. We observed the training, fortunately, in February, and it is some very qualified instructors doing good adult education in the classroom, as well as the skills training. We'll come back to this in a minute, but and we believe, and this is our research orientation as well, that they need to implement a valid and useful systems of evaluation. And I'm very impressed with the work that the team has done there in the training division to evaluate the classes, to get surveys done, to evaluate every instructor, and to test the officers to see if they're learning anything, et cetera, and to give feedback right away. They have early, quick feedback when a course is not going well that the instructor and the administration gets, and then they have more formal official feedback in the form of reports on evaluation that you can read that are online. They need to document and report training delivered and received. The LMS system has done that very well, and it continues to expand. Also, part of that was required by the agreement was you can't have instructors at the training academy, at the training division, that have problematic work histories themselves with use of force, et cetera. So we have reviewed those work histories of people that are being considered as instructors, and we have seen no violations of that to date. And then auditing the overall training program, they did a very comprehensive audit in 2018. They have expanded their auditing capacity significantly for the whole Bureau. But it's not applicable here because they were only required to do one, and they will do more training auditing down the road, but they're expanded into several other areas of the Bureau right now, and they're tied up with that. So anyway, Tom, let's go on to the next slide here. As you could imagine, the COVID-19 has impacted training. It's also impacted the entire Portland Police Bureau. So we will be keeping a close eye on that for our next couple of reports to see that they're managing things well. It's a very difficult time for all of us. But in terms of training in particular, the in-service training, which we observed in February, fortunately, and the large classes were suspended in March. And so the Bureau moved to online format. There were some videos where officers got to see, officers who had not been through the in-service got to see the training that was done earlier, some of the training we observed. And then there's virtual interaction through Zoom, like we're doing tonight. Some of that's going on. Skills exercise is really important. As you can imagine, police do a lot of in-class stuff, but they also do a lot of practice in the field, everything from firearms to you name it, to dealing with individuals that are having a mental health crisis, as we've strongly recommended. They're continuing to do that with smaller groups to maintain social distance. So small groups, we'll keep in touch with them, but they're not doing it the way they were before. So the whole training thing has to be rethought. The state of Oregon is not even training the recruits right now. So there's all kinds of issues down the road about handling that. We look at training in these different modalities. The quality certainly varies. I mean, in-person training is obviously the best in a lot of ways. I don't have to explain that to you. You know what I'm talking about. The virtual interactive training is where PPB is headed and doing now, but it's a challenge for everyone, right? I mean, look at right now nationwide, and I'm sure in Oregon, what's going on with teachers from elementary to high school to college. They're learning a whole new way of teaching, and some of them are good at it and some are not very good at it. And I was helping my grandson recently, and it's very difficult dealing with this. So the police are working, the Portland Police Bureau is struggling with this now. They're gonna do their best to make this work, and we will help keep an eye on that. And then there's the static videos, which are being done, but are less high quality because there's not much opportunity there is no opportunity for interaction. So we'll continue to monitor this, and as they struggle, you know, this is a challenge. I think that they're doing a great job, what I've seen so far, but it's in the early stages of transitioning to an interactive virtual training environment for the Portland Police. All right, Tom, do you want to, I'll give this back to you, I guess.
Sure. So now I'll go over section 5, which is community-based mental health services. One of the things that we've generally talked about with section 5 is that the focus of section 5 is on entities outside of the city and PPB. So we've looked at the city and PPB's role. And in this report, we continue to find that they play an active role. There's a number of committees or subcommittees that they either lead or they participate in, such as the Behavioral Health Unit Advisory Committee, the Behavioral Health Coordination Team, the Unity Transportation Work Group, Oregon Behavioral Health Collaborative, and the Legacy ED Community Outreach Group. We also looked at the Unity Center as it relates to paragraph 89. And we understand that there's been some community concerns with regards to the Unity Center, but in evaluating compliance with the settlement agreement, we do see that the Unity Center does operate in accordance with the Memphis Model Crisis Response System. And it does so in the sense that it mitigates the potential for criminalization. It provides officers an avenue for getting a person mental health services as opposed to transporting them to jail. And it also reduces the resource burden on PPB by having a designated drop-off center as opposed to using a traditional hospital wherein the officer may have to stand by with the community member until they're admitted. And so under the original notion of a drop-off center in accordance with the Memphis model, it does continue to fit that function. So now moving on to section 6, which is crisis intervention. We looked at this from kind of the sense of when a call would come in and moving forward with that. So the first oftentimes the first step in a crisis intervention call is a call going into BOEC. So we looked at BOEC and their policies. They remain in effect. We've reviewed their policies. We've also observed their 16-hour CIT training. We've observed their in-service training, and those are, continue to happen. And then going with that systems approach, BOEC conducts ongoing audits to look at if a call is not dispatched as ECIT, but ultimately is coded by PPB as such. Is there something that the BOEC call taker should have heard or should have caught to indicate that it should have been an ECIT call? And their ongoing audits have found that 97% of the time, the correct action was taken based on the information available to the call taker at that time. BOEC also has an ongoing relationship with Multnomah County Crisis Line, wherein if somebody, if it's not an immediate requirement to get a ECIT officer, they have the ability to transfer to the MCCL, who then has the ability to connect that community member with service providers. Moving on, looking at Portland Police Bureau as a whole, so all officers continue to receive 40 hours of CIT training prior to graduating the Advanced Academy and prior to taking independent duties on the street. They also continue to receive annual in-service related to crisis intervention skills, de-escalation. The training that we were able to observe in February contained a person in crisis scenario, and so these things have continued to happen for each year that we've been doing the monitoring. The specialized group of ECIT officers, they receive 40 additional hours. So on top of the 40 hours that they would receive as regular patrol officers, they receive that 40 additional hours. And in accordance with the settlement agreement, they retain their normal patrol duties. There's specific selection criteria. There is retention criteria if they are found to have used excessive force against a person in a mental health crisis, that would take them off of ECIT. The PPB also has a system wherein the notification would be made to BHU if that was the case. So these checks and balances to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. And also the mental health template, which is PPB's data collection tool. We evaluated the mental health template about 3 years ago. We find that officers are using it, that the data collected is collected in a consistent fashion, and that PPB then uses that data to evaluate their ECIT program to identify areas where improvements could be made. So all of that's kind of a primary response system by PPB. And we also looked at what we had called secondary response systems, one of them being the behavioral health response team. This is 5 teams. Each team contains an ECIT officer and a mental health professional. There are teams in each precinct. There are also one team for houses population, and another team for follow-up with prior BHRT clients. And this goes back to PPB using the data. So they had found that within 60 days of receiving BHRT intervention, there was a slight blip in the number of police contacts. So they created a BHRT team to follow up with those persons to make sure that they were still getting the services they needed. There's also, with the BHRT, when somebody is referred, they're evaluated for BHRT intervention. And in 2019, in 2019 Q4, there were 249 referrals. 135 of those referrals were assigned to the BHRT, so 54%. And this chart on this slide just shows the breakdown of people of why a person was referred. So 56 out of the 135 were referred for escalating behavior, 38 for frequent contacts, 19 for risk to others, 16 for risk to self, and then 6 for another category. Finally, there was the service coordination team as a secondary response option. And what the service coordination team does is they facilitate service provision to persons who are chronically houseless, suffer chronic addiction, and are chronically involved with the criminal justice system. Our evaluations in the past have shown that there's been a positive impact on employment and also a reduction in police contacts. PPB also partners with Portland State University for their capstone study class, who has found that there's a lower cost to the county through involvement with the service coordination team as opposed to if there was no involvement. And then finally, as an overall oversight, the Behavioral Health Unit Advisory Committee, the BHUAC, acts as an advisory body and discusses a number of topics related to the BHU, the Behavioral Health Unit. So in the fourth quarter, they discussed BHU and BHRT updates, ECIT training, the Portland Street Response Pilot Program, case studies with ECIT officers of BHRT teams, as well as, and I believe Lakiana alluded to this earlier, a plan for increasing community engagement overall. Moving on to section 8, which is the employee information system. So what the employee information system does is each night data is uploaded from force events, traumatic incidents, complaints, and commendations. And when a certain threshold is met, and we outline those thresholds in our report, an alert is automatically created. That alert then is reviewed by EIS administrators, and the decision is made to forward it to the RU or not. What this does is it identifies potentially problematic officers based on their force events or traumatic incidents, complaints, or accommodations, and ask the supervisors to take a look at those officers. So one of the things that we had noted is that there seems to be a trend of getting the right alerts to supervisors. So on this table here, we can see that the alerts sent to the supervisor, the percentage of all the alerts from the RU that were sent to the RU that are sent to the supervisors, those have decreased. But at the same time, the interventions have increased. So one of the things that we said might be an explanatory reason is that the correct alerts are now being sent, and so that's why you're seeing a higher proportion of interventions. Also related to the employee information system is the requirement to review employees either on either biannually or employees that are new to the command. These have historically, at least since the third quarter of 2018, been consistently done either at 98%, 99%, or 100%. We did identify in the fourth quarter a reduction for the 116B compliance. This related to the chief's office. It was identified before we had even identified it, and it was remedied. Again, showing that PPB is able to find issues when they happen and implement corrective action. And then the final section that I'll talk about before Dr. Rosenbaum talks about community engagement and the PCCEP, I'll talk about section 8, which is accountability. One of the things, we looked at a couple of things here to describe a good accountability system. One of those things is access. Do Portland community members have the ability to submit a complaint? Do they have access into the accountability system? And there's a number of ways that community members can submit a complaint, either submitted to PPB, submitted to IPR, and both PPB and IPR can initiate a complaint. We also see that IPR closures are declining. In the 2014, 73% of administrative complaints were administratively closed. This has been generally reduced over time to now in 2018 was 56%. Another thing that we look for with a good accountability system is transparency. Here again, we find that the Portland accountability system does have the transparency. You can do online tracking of cases. Community members receive letters at the major stages of an investigation. CRC meetings are open to the public. PRB summaries are provided online, as well as IPR has a website which contains data that community members can conduct their own data analysis. Expediency was one of the things that was one of the last hurdles that PPB and IPR needed to overcome for substantial compliance. We found that they did meet that threshold to complete full administrative investigations in 180 days. And currently they have weekly case meetings to discuss cases that may be going overdue or are overdue. There's ongoing evaluations, data analysis by IPR and PPB, and they're identifying trends and addressing those issues to remedy the situation for future. There's also consistency. We see mirrored policies, we see joint training. We took 20 cases, which included administrative closures, supervisory investigations, precinct referrals, full investigations by both IPR and IA. And we found that regardless of which entity did the evaluation or which track the complaint went, that they were conducted in a comprehensive fashion that we agreed with how they ended. We also see the discipline guide, which shows consistent when a officer is found to have a sustained violation, that the discipline guide ensures consistent discipline. Finally, we look for a system of checks and balances within the city and PPB. And here again, we see that there's IPR review of RU manager findings. There's a CRC, there's the PRB, and although not included here, the city council. So there's a number of checks and balances within the system. And then finally, within the Section 8 accountability section, there's discussion of the requirements for OIS events, including separation of witness and involved officers, walkthroughs and interviews of witnesses, interviews of the involved officers, communication restriction orders, and grand juries. And we found that these paragraphs of the settlement agreement continue to be complied with as well. And I will hand it off to Dr. Rosenbaum.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Now to the stuff that you're probably the most interested in yourself. We think that based on our observations and our analysis and just being part of your work and having people on the ground there like Amy Ruiz and also people from DOJ like Jared, we think that you guys have done an incredible job in many ways. And these are, again, you're a system of community engagement, and PPB has some other systems as well, but you guys are holding regular meetings, your subcommittee meetings. I have to say, as one of your community members said today, we're impressed that you've made those adjustments to the challenges that you face, and you continue to meet and do well at it. Town halls like tonight with us and listening sessions. So, and you've given opportunities for the community and government input. You've community through all these mechanisms I just mentioned, but also you're working on student surveys for whole nother angle. And the extent to which you've looked into topics such as body-worn cameras and facial recognition technology is laudable. And you clearly have the support of the mayor and the chief of police. They both visited your meetings in January and were very explicit about their support for PCCEP. You've maintained that working relationship with them and with non-city groups, and I think that's really important. Also, I know DOJ presented, I believe, in February at one of your meetings. And you've gathered information from all this work on police-community relations. You've made recommendations. You've set up frameworks for thinking about body-worn camera policies and important topics like procedural justice and the training and the things that are really relevant to police community interactions and that affect the legitimacy of the police in the eyes of the community. Tom, let's go to the next one here. In terms of the city's role and the Portland Police Bureau's role, I mean, they've continued to help with the PCCEP with retaining membership and maintaining a pool of alternates and appointing them and training new members and staffing with some very talented people there. They're here tonight, and also the information technology support you need to gain access to the public as you have tonight, and legal assistance as needed. The Portland Police Bureau, as required, continues to collect data and analyze and report data on demographics of the community, both of the people served in general and also with stops and that sort of thing. I think some of you are beginning to see that Portland keeps a very thorough data set and dashboard for people to look at stops and citations and force, etc. They've continued to engage with you. They come to your meetings every time, your subcommittee meetings, and they don't just send people off the street. They send high-level members of the Portland Police Bureau. And they've continued their own outreach activities. If you go to their website, you'll see the dozens and dozens of things that they've been doing. Of course, again, the COVID-19 has changed the ballgame. And so, you know, they're gonna have to rethink that as well and how they can take the community engagement plan and carry it out in different ways than was originally conceived. And you're doing the same. And we appreciate that. And well, we know that that's difficult. Tom, do you want to, I have another slide here. I can't remember. Oh, so the challenges, I've kind of alluded to this. Portland, the Bureau has faced its challenges with training and with community outreach. Some of the ones that you guys have faced that we made note of, the resignation of the subcommittee for people with mental illness. There's a positive and negative side to all of these comments here. And the positive, by that I mean remedies have been introduced, adaption has occurred. That's what Tom and I, the compliance team, is looking for. And although there were, you know, various issues, and you guys know the reasons for that better than I do, on the positive side, you've reconstituted a behavioral health subcommittee that went extremely well. We thought earlier this month, and we'll report on that, of course, in our second quarter. There's the PCCEP turnover issue. There have been members since the beginning, a number of members have stepped down, but we have to remember most of them were, you know, for personal reasons, and this is a voluntary thing. On the positive side, the mayor has appointed 2 new members, as you know, and you've also got the youth seats. I believe that you're up to like 13. I mean, I think you're pretty much full committee at this point. COVID-19, you know, as you said, it caused you to cancel your meeting in March, but you've moved the subcommittees to teleconferencing, and you're now having full meetings here with your PCCEP. So we appreciate your adaptability. That's great. There's also, you know, Judge Simon, as you know, continued the conditionally approved designation of PCCEP rather than approving that. Well, we weren't happy about that, but on a positive note, it's really important to underscore the fact that the Department of Justice and the compliance team have both given substantial compliance for Section 9 on community engagement as of January 10th. So that's important. So I'm going to leave it at that. Tom, is there one last slide? I think we just want to thank you and open it up for comments. And again, here's the deadline I was talking about. So if some of you don't get to say everything you wanted to say tonight, feel free to send us an email to rosenbaumassociates@gmail.com, LLP@gmail.com. And but I'll turn it back over to the organizers here and the leadership. And
thank you both very much for the presentation and the work as always. First, we will go turn the mic over to PCCEP members for comment, and then we will turn the mic over more broadly. Lakiana, I know you had a question for our presenters.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna attempt to say this in the most diplomatic way that I can. Dr. Rosenbaum, I really do appreciate your work and time and effort, and just looking at the report. I know you guys spend a lot of time on this, Tom, you as well. But I think if in all of this, in PCCEP, in the work we're doing with the Police Bureau, the worst thing we can do is to not be honest with ourselves and not be honest with the rest of the group. As a Black man living here in Portland, as someone who works with youth that are constantly coming into custody, in contact with the Portland Police Bureau, I find this report to be weak, incomplete, and insulting to everybody that's on this conversation. It feels like we're talking about two different bureaus. I understand the Bureau has made significant progress. I understand that they are making strides and doing things, but when use of force continues to be high, when the officers were just on here talking about the number of shootings going through the roof, houseless continue to be an issue, mental health continue to be an issue, to produce a report like that, which is not critical. We deserve a higher standard of critique of the Bureau. And that is not to come down on the Bureau and say that they're not doing the work or that they're not making improvements, but to read through that report, I feel like I'm listening to a Bureau in a different city. I didn't see any recommendations in there of where they can improve. I believe half of that report should be improvements. Even if you had an outstanding Bureau, there's always room for improvements. And I did not see that. And if the compliance office is going to gain respect and credibility in the community, those reports have to be much more dig deeper and critique and give feedback that reflects what we're seeing and hearing in the community, because what you guys reported is not what I hear in the community, not what many of our members that are in the community are hearing. And we want to see less of the things that are going well. Not that those aren't important, but we know those are there. Where are the improvements? There should be like a section that says, here is where we think the Bureau can improve. And I know that exists. And so that's what I will say about this.
Okay, well, can I respond to that?
Please.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you, Lakiana. I appreciate your candidness and your openness. I'll say several things. First of all, I've spent much of my career looking at issues of race and policing and community relations. And so I do care deeply about what you say, and I do understand what you're saying. But I want to say a couple things to put it in context. To be honest, you guys are coming late to this, and we've spent 6 years in Portland. And if you read some of our early reports, they're highly critical of the Portland Police Bureau. And also, the behind the scenes arguments and things that have gone on, I can't tell you how intense they've been. And DOJ was the same way. And so that's point number one. Point number two is we are in the 6th and apparently final year, unless they screw up pretty badly, of a maintenance year. They've already achieved substantial compliance, and unless they screw up badly, we made a lot of recommendations in earlier years. Half of our reports were recommendations, and we still have recommendations. I didn't talk about everything tonight. We didn't have time. I didn't say that PCCEP, for example, doesn't have enough females, but I said that in our report. And I recommended you guys take that more seriously. So there's a bunch of recommendations in there if you look. But I think they are collecting data. I think the burden, back to one more point. The settlement agreement is a legal document with specific language. And it's really important that you read it word by word and say, in this paragraph, you failed to comply with this, and here's the reasons why, rather than make general statements about, race relations. So it's a legal document. We made them comply, and they did it on their own too. No, we just didn't force them. But is the Portland Police Bureau perfect? Oh no, there's lots of ways that it could be improved. But I'm sticking to what I was hired to do, and you guys are going to carry the torch after we leave, and other people will as well. But we had a specific job to do. So I'm trying to put it in a little bit different framework.
Can I add on top of that too? One of the things that we've stressed with this report are those systems of being able to identify things themselves. So when I talked about the force inspector, we could have looked at the case that was sent to IA for potential excessive force. The force inspector was able to identify that. That to us is an improvement. That to us is something that they are able, that it went through the entire after action review process and not sent to IA, and the force inspector looked at it and said, wait a second, I think this one slipped through, I'm going to forward this one. So those systems are what we're looking at. I think some of the places that we also could have been critical when we brought it up with PPB, when we identified an issue, they already said, yeah, we know that happened. Here's the email showing what we did. Before we were able to even bring it up, they were able to identify it. And like Dr. Rosenbaum said, it's not going to be a perfect police bureau. There are going to be issues, there are going to be mistakes. One of the things that we're looking for is, do they have those systems to be able to self-identify that and self-correct it? And we've seen concrete examples of that, and where we've seen that, we've given them credit for that too.
Thank you both. Other PCCEP comments or questions for our guest, Marcia? Once you can unmute, there you go.
Oh, I got it. Thank you for, I think both of your comments. I think it's really helpful. A few things are running through my mind when I'm thinking about just the feedback that Lakiana gave and Dr. Rosenbaum. I think, what we're talking about here is the letter of the law, which is a settlement agreement, and the spirit of the law, which is what the community thinks and feels and perceives. And so earlier on, I think Dan Handelman made a comment about concerns about African-American people being targeted. And Officer Julio then responded by giving an example of a recent shooting that took place, to which they responded with probable cause. They did what they needed to do. And based off the race of the individuals they were told not to make arrests or do certain type of things as a response. To me, that's like a technical piece that the Bureau is doing to be technically in compliance. But then when we forget about the public safety piece and what, how do we have a discussion around some of the concerns, obviously, that Lakiana brought up, to make sure that we're responding to safety considerations, but also I think, just the response around not responding in a certain way for fear of looking like they're being racist or doing racist things to be in compliance. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm just trying to process that. And I think that's an example of where the Bureau's trying to respond the best way they can, but also are trying to be in compliant to this settlement agreement, but then kind of cutting corners in other ways, if that makes sense. That's
yeah, I think it does make sense. And we've been concerned since 2014 after Ferguson with depolicing, is what we call it sometimes, where officers are saying, hey, screw it, I'm not going to stop anybody because I don't want to get in trouble. And we can't have that happen either. But they should be doing what's right, and they should be, but they are being educated about implicit bias, about procedural injustice. They are getting an education. I've given them works. I mean, we now know that you can do lots of data. I was hoping Portland would have body-worn cameras, because you can learn a lot from that. Professor Engelhard, who was on my panel in San Francisco this last year, she's done data analysis in Oakland PD, for example, of body-worn cameras, showing that officers use a lot more hostile and more demeaning language with people of color than they do with whites. And that's the kind of data that you can get if you have, the right, if you have body-worn cameras. But I don't, it's something to keep an eye on. I don't, on the other hand, if the number of unnecessary stops of African Americans and Latinx, if for suspicious behavior declines, then that's probably a good thing, because the numbers are really high in most cities, and what's disparity and what's racism is a controversial issue, and that requires good data analysis. More analysis is good. It's a big complex subject to go into right now.
Thank you. Other PCCEP members, Yolanda, and then Amy.
I just want to echo kind of what Dr. Rosenbaum said about the report and the way it's formatted. For folks who are new to reading reports like this, they can kind of come off as abrasive and with little, I don't know, I guess what I'm trying to say, as a former Portland Police Bureau employee, I would sit with police officer applicants and learn their total history. And, these were people who were trying to apply to work for the Portland Police Bureau. But the way I was taught to write my report was a very objective way. And so when you would read my report, it wouldn't reflect like that I had cared about, the applicant, or that I knew so much. And so I agree with Dr. Rosenbaum that we as PCCEP members should be more critical about the report, but and to provide specific examples, because I think just the majority of people who are reading this, it is hard to understand. So I don't know. I just, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and there's only so much we can do, honestly. That's part of the problem here. I've tried to say that. We had a much bigger impact 3 or 4 years ago than we've had lately. But
thank you. Amy, and then Andre.
Yeah, first I want to say thank you for doing all this hard work. I was in the jail the day James Tassi died. So I've been kind of involved in the criminal justice system from the floor for a very long time. And in the last 10 years, there's been enormous improvements in the way things used to be compared to the way things are now. So I'm going to use Unity as an example, because I remember when the officers had to go from hospital to hospital and stay with the individual until they were admitted, which could be hours and hours, where now the officer can bring the individual to Unity. They can walk in, go sit in a room that's surrounded with nurses and other individuals and be seen right away, and then the officers can go back to work. So for most of my population, the situation is improving in the way folks are being managed when they have to have a hold and have to go through the police and the ambulance to the hospital. So I guess sometimes when you don't see it from the ground up, it's hard to imagine where we've come from. But I have to say, with the building of the new Bashang building, which will be the drop-in center, I think everybody's worked really hard to take us to a next step. And we just have to carry the torch and go further with it. So thank you all for doing your hard work. I've been around since since 1998 in this whole police sheriff scenario. And I've seen enormous improvements, and yet we have a lot of work to do, but thank you all for your hard work. And I, as chair of the behavioral health unit, or behavioral health committee, sorry, intend on having really rich, open conversations so we can all learn a little bit more about each other in today's environment. So I just want to say thank you for the hard work everybody's done to get us to this point, having come from back there. Okay.
Thank you, Amy. Andre.
Yes, I'd like to thank you both. You clearly put a lot of work into putting together this report. And I understand, Dr. Rosenbaum, from what you say about the report primarily focusing on whether the city and PPB are in substantial compliance. I'd also like to circle back a bit to Lakiana's comment. You had mentioned that you did see areas that, were there that could be improved even as the city was still in substantial compliance. And you spoke very briefly about those, for instance, citing PCCEP's composition. I was wondering if you have any others that you could speak about off the top of your head right now.
Well, I've focused on certain things, and Tom may want to comment here as well, but training is something that can always be improved. And I think I would encourage you guys to, when the world gets semi-normal again, to take an interest in that. They have done a lot to introduce important, innovative training topics and methods. But there can never be enough attention to these matters, in my opinion. I've argued for years that the training in policing has been a lot about talking heads and classroom stuff when it comes to treating people with respect and handling crisis situations. And we have the fundamental principles down from research about what you need to do to show compassion and show objectivity and neutrality by listening to everything people say rather than passing judgment, etc. And I know Lakiana, I know other people, that some of the youth folks, you guys have taken interest in this. But what we need always more of is practice. Police, and not just Portland, but nationwide, they practice a lot of other things. They practice control techniques, they practice weapons, but you need to practice interpersonal communication skills. And they do some of that, and they have done some of it, and it's enough to keep us satisfied. But I think that that's always something that could be improved. And working with youth, like Lakiana's, historically, Portland, no matter where you are, the relationship with youth is always strained. This is a classic problem, and especially youth of color. It's a standard problem, and looking into the dynamics of that and what's going on there. In other cities, we've interviewed youth and found out in greater detail what's going through their mind and what their experiences. You have lived experience with mental health, you have lived experience with the police. So have a ground up kind of knowledge, qualitative and quantitative, and then use that as a way to make recommendations.
And are you aware of other cities that have implemented specific programs that have been successful in addressing those particular areas?
Not yet. Okay. There's pieces here and there. And honestly, Portland has one of the most impressive mental health teams of anywhere in the country. Tom's more of an expert on this than I am, but but those principles of CIT should be applied to every encounter. That's my view of listening and showing compassion. And it's tough though. Police have a tough job. I've spent 40 years riding along with cops in many dozens and dozens of cities, and they get treated pretty badly at times as well, or they get to see the worst of human nature. At 2 a.m, they get called in on all these things, and so they don't see the average person. They see very needy situations of people who are high or who are having mental health crisis or whatever, and so they get kind of cynical, and they need to be refreshed constantly. And that's part of which I do admire this wellness training. I think that's a good start. But anyway, I could go on and on about that, but I think, I don't know, Tom, did you want to add anything to that?
Just to add on to the notion of the CIT skills being applied to, more than calls involving a person in mental health crisis. And that's, I think, one of the unique things about Portland system is they provide the 40 hours training to everybody. To have that enhanced group, I think one of the things that we really pushed, this was in, we commented on it in this report, but we had really pushed for it in the last report, was BOEC telecommunicators, the call takers. If they were unsure whether a call would benefit from an ECIT officer, send them out. The mantra of when in doubt, send them out. And so really we push that, that to get that ECIT officer to as many calls, but there are that group of calls that all officers have that training that most other agencies, that is their specialized training. The 40 hours to make them a specialized officer is something that all officers in Portland get. So I think that's a positive component to Portland's system.
Thank you.
And we can talk more about this some other time. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other Steve? Want to go ahead?
Yeah, this is related to the COVID, how you talked about how, they went from what you mentioned, just that necessary interaction, that necessary training. Now it's gone to this, the virtual stuff. I'm concerned that we may be looking at poor numbers later on because of this period that we're in. And I just wondered about how, and I don't know if any of the officers are, or the chiefs here to explain just how the police hopes to ramp up. Like every business that I know, nonprofits, everybody's coming up with their plan for the ramping up. And I just don't know where's the plan for the Portland police to ramp back up so that their training does get back to that scenario training that's super critical, important for training skills.
Yeah, that's a good question, and maybe someone from the Bureau would like to answer it. I have every intention of asking that question myself. I was just talking to them today about that we would be doing extensive interviews, if not visit, to talk about their plan. And, I do know that they are planning to do some of the in-person classes with smaller groups. They have a big training area that has like 20 tables. They used to have 4 or 5 officers at each table, or 3 or 4 officers. Now they're planning to have 1 officer at each table. And they're going to then, and some of the hands-on exercises, they're going to be groups, I believe, of 10 or smaller. I don't know the details of this, so I don't want to speak too much, but they are starting to think about that. And the virtual thing, they know that can only take them so far.
And this is Ryan Lee, the ACS Services again. Just to add to what Dennis Rosenbaum was saying, part of it is identifying the training where it's necessary for people to actually be in close proximity, where you need that interaction. And part of it is understanding really the nature of the 21st century that we're in now, and leveraging technology, much like we're doing today, to accomplish that opportunity for dialogue. So in some instances, there is training that can be delivered through, for lack of a better description, sort of this rote recording and some testing on the backside of it. There are other things that from a teaching model, you need to have what they refer to as teachbacks. You want the interaction where you're seeing it from the students. This platform, Zoom, whether it's Zoom or Microsoft Teams or, name the series of competitors, this virtual learning environment has presented some opportunities for us to carry out training where there's that ability for the interaction with the instructor while still keeping people at a safe distance and minimizing the amount, for lack of a better description, you're talking about ramping up. It minimizes how far back we're falling and have to ramp up. So we're able to focus more on that training that requires scenario-based training, physical hands-on, human dialogue, where you're getting more of the subtle body language and scenario-based training. It allows us to focus on that as we begin to ramp back up. It's also, we've taken it as an opportunity to look at how we align our training structurally. Are there things that can be presented earlier in this virtual format that we can then build off of more effectively later, rather than sort of running it through the standard syllabus. So we're looking at a variety of different things, if that makes sense. If Captain Dobson's still on, I'm not sure if he is. If he wants to weigh in a little bit, he's the captain of the training division. It's really rather a complex thing that we're looking at. We're having to adapt it because, being very candid with everybody here, nobody's exactly sure when the shelter in place is going to end. And so how do we evolve, and what can we present in this format? And it's much like we're watching, school kids and college kids throughout the nation trying to adapt to this virtual learning environment. A lot of it is really changing the way the teacher delivers. It's not, I've taught college on the side before. It's different when you teach an online class than it is when you teach in a classroom, and learning how to present that material is incredibly important.
Andrew, this is Robert King. Can I weigh in?
Sure.
I really appreciate the conversation that's played out tonight. Dr. Rosenbaum in particular, I want to thank you and your team for the extensive and the exhaustive work that you've done over the years into helping PPB engage in substantial compliance and comprehensive reforms and improvements that you've recognized in your reports. But I also, like Amy, I want to thank PPB for their extensive and hard work, and community members, everybody who's here on PCCEP tonight, so many others who have helped to implement the settlement agreement. Listening to, having been a part of PCCEP now for a period of time and hearing the conversation play out tonight, here's what I see as the opportunity in all of this from my point of view for all of us. PCCEP, for the first time in Portland, I believe, affords the police and community an opportunity to have the conversation that has needed to be had. And in particular, Lakiana, I wanted to say, I hear your truth, I hear your experience, and I hear your perspective and what you've represented. And I want to carve out a space for that, to recognize and to acknowledge that. We need to have the courageous conversations to improve the relationship between police and community. And dialogue, as Chief Lee has indicated, dialogue's about learning something for ourselves, each one of us, and then having that change or impact the way we think and feel, or the way we act or behave in the world. It's about being able to hear each other's truths. It's about being willing to stay engaged. It's about having a conversation even though there's going to be discomfort. And it's having a conversation knowing that there may not be immediate change, or there may be non-closure. But I just wanted to offer a perspective, from my point of view, as a person who policed in Portland. I was a police officer in Portland for over 27 years, and I witnessed firsthand over more than 2.5 decades the kind of policing that happened in our city. And I understand that there are different perspectives on this agreement, and there's different perspectives on what kind of progress has been made. But I do want to acknowledge that there has been tremendous organizational learning, and there have been countless improvements in policy, in training, in supervision, and in management. And these have been documented extensively, and they have transformed PPB as a police organization. Now, has it gone far enough? Has the relationship with community improved to the point where all of us feel satisfied? No. This is the opportunity in this, I feel, for all of us. For me, the report highlights a city, a police bureau, and a community that is all committed to best practice police service. I know that the city, the mayor, and the police bureau are committed to serving a diverse community and committed to serving our diverse community proudly. I believe, from my point of view, from my experience, from my perspective, I believe we have done good work in many respects, but I also believe we have much, much more work to do. And this is what I see as the important role for PCCEP moving forward.
Thank you, Robert. One more question for our guest from me before opening to the public, and that is on, let's see, on page 46, the top, you talk about stops data, and I wanted to ask concrete question about that, because you note that the Bureau is working on revising the stops form that they use to provide certain information about a given stop, and that training will occur, of course, prior to implementation. I know that in a variety of cities, their stops forms include a significant amount of data, including a specific reason for a stop. In New York City, it includes a sort of a drop-down menu of a number of things that an officer might select, and there's been a lot of debate over the past several years about sort of what should be on that list. So my question for you is, are there certain things that the city and, of course, PCCEP in its sort of oversight role should be thinking about in terms of the stops data, from your perspective, given what other departments have done around the country? Thanks.
Well, that's a good question. We haven't really spent enough time looking at, I know they're in the process of rethinking it, and we need to talk to them more about what they're doing. Certainly, there should be, whether it's pedestrian or vehicle stops, there should be reasons for the stop articulated, and that's legal, you know, right? Terry stops, there should be reasonable suspicion or some other emergency matter that requires the stop. And that has been shown to be problematic nationwide, and that there is differential stops that have happened. And I think that the more you can make, well, I'm as a current researcher for many years, I believe that if you measure something, it matters and people take it seriously. If you don't measure it, then anybody can say whatever they want to say about what's going on. And so if we can get police to engage in that process, then they're more likely to be thoughtful about what they're doing and more likely to back off if they have to, or really justify their actions. But you also have to be careful that people, and this is where body-worn cameras and lots of other data become helpful, that they don't just say reasonable suspicion after the fact as a justification for stopping somebody for another reason. So, I mean, I'm not sure what other variables they're looking at there, but the circumstances around the stop, and but I think that again, being forced to stop and think about what you're doing is a way to change behavior. So, but we'll get back to you about that. I think that's an important subject.
Thank you. We'll now open it up to comments and questions from the public. I know, Dan Handelman, you've mentioned that you have something to say. I invite you to unmute and share your thoughts or questions.
There we go. Hi, this is Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch. I'm going to make a couple of minutes of comments, and I appreciate it if the compliance team wants to take notes and respond at the end. That's fine. I just want to get through my comments. I really appreciated the comments made by the chairs, especially Mr. Drury. We noticed that in the report, it talks about the fact that the police have noticed that there are some disparities in police responses to communities of color, but according to the report, their solution is to have training that is designed to increase trust and legitimacy, not necessarily, therefore, to reduce those disparities. And that's a deep concern. The percentages of forced to custody is very misleading statistic, because as even the report says, the interactions with people in mental health crisis aren't designed to end in custody. They're supposed to end with people getting help. So when this force is used against people in mental health crisis or at protests, which aren't even included in those data, and there's no custody, then that percentage is kind of meaningless. The oversight system gets short shrift as usual. Chief Outlaw undermined an agreement she made with the Citizen Review Committee about a case where an officer lied about being able to arrest somebody for recording them. And she's supposed to go to the city council if she disagrees with the CRC's finding, but instead she changed what the allegation was. The officer, instead of being fired, got 1 day off. So there's a huge gap in the system, and that case isn't even discussed by the compliance team. The compliance team also never has interviewed a single person, as far as I know, that made a complaint or went through the system or filed an appeal to see whether they're satisfied with the way our oversight system works. And you talked a little bit to Mr. Co-Chair Kalik about the PPB stop data. It's noted in the report that those data are delivered to the PCCEP. I'm really hoping with the Racial Equity Committee ramping up that you're going to do something with it. It's only required for you to receive it, and it should be discussed. There was a committee that disappeared shortly after the agreement was signed that used to look at them every time they came out, and I'd like you to, as a committee, to look at them at least once a year. And I do also appreciate that these new stop data screens are being discussed, and I think you all should have input into it and allow for community input into it. And finally, our newsletter. If we had a personal meeting tonight, I could have handed you the new newsletter, the May 2020 issue of the Cop Watch newsletter. We're going to post it online early next week. We're mailing it out to 200 supporters tomorrow. It should be in mailboxes soon. But I really miss being able to be there in person and give you a physical copy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Handelman. Does the compliance officer want to respond to any of those notes?
Tom, you may want to respond to the force. I'll just say about the pointing out that we point out there are disparities and we recommend training on trust. We're also recommending training on implicit bias and procedural justice. I mean, that's about listening to people, coming up with reasons why you're stopping, what you're doing, listening to what their reaction is. And implicit bias is also about learning that we all have biases. We're all prejudiced against people of color and various. We're prejudiced against women. We're prejudiced against LGBT. We have all kinds of prejudices. And we act on them sometimes, but others of us who are more aware of our prejudices, we stop ourselves from acting on them. And that kind of training is important. And it does relate to potential future disparities. So I don't know, Tom, did you want to respond to his point about?
Yeah, the mental, persons in mental health crisis and custodies. Where we were saying with that is that it's hard to compare with all arrests and with PPP's overall use of force. Force to custody as a ratio is a generally accepted practice of kind of evaluating how much force is being used. However, when you have a person who's in mental health crisis, the primary goal is not to arrest them. There are still arrests of people who are in mental health crisis, but it's not necessarily an apples to apples comparison, which is why on page on page 14, we do kind of look at those raw numbers just as kind of a framework to be able to say that out of 21,000 total calls where somebody had a mental health component, and out of 1,398 ACIT calls with a mental health template, there was only 46 uses of force. So again, that can't be compared though to overall force to custody rate, because it's not apples to apples. And so that I just wanted to be able to respond to that part, that that it's not that there are no custodies, that there are no arrests of persons in mental health crisis, but one of the goals is to avoid the arrest and have transport to services or some other outcome be the primary goal.
Thank you. Other members of the community, comments or questions? Trebi, you have a question? Is that your hand raised?
Actually, it's a comment. I want to comment on what Lakiana said. So when you look at the report and all the statistics and the training, that is wonderful that they're doing all that, but there's still hurt that is happening right now. And there has to have a place for that to be spoken about. Last summer, I was having a conversation with a police officer who I dearly love. He's such a beautiful human being. And I was telling him about a friend of mine who owns a store. And I went to see her and she was totally stressed out, shaking. 2 days earlier, she had been followed home by a police officer. She's an African-American woman. And he followed her for like 35 blocks. And she was terrified the whole time. And I was telling him about that. And he said, oh, well, I always get nervous when someone follows me and I'm a police officer. And I said to him, yeah, I understand that. And so do I. But do you fear for your life? And he said, well, no. And I said, but she does. And it took him a minute. He sat there. And then I told him another thing that happened to her about 2 months later, where she got pulled over, not in Portland, by another police officer. They held her and her wife for 45 minutes and how she was telling me how awful that was. And as I told him about that experience, he said to me, well, that's really wrong how they treated her, and she should go and make a complaint. And he said, why doesn't she complain? And I said, you don't understand. She's afraid to make a complaint. She's an African-American woman. She's afraid. And he said to me, if there's anything I can do to help, I will. If she wants to have coffee, I'll help her. That to me is a police officer that I can trust, because he took a look at himself and realized the bias that he had, that it had never occurred to him that someone who's an African-American gets pulled over by a police officer worries for their life. He let that in. And I think that's where we have to go, to where police officers recognize their impact and what they can do about it. And that police officer, I trust. So when I hear what Robert King says about the opportunity for PCCEP, I agree. But I also think we have to talk about the hurt that's there so that we can heal it and release it and come together openly with each other, the community and the police, being willing to be vulnerable and hear each other without judgment. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Andrew's on, yep, a quick break right now. We're gonna wrap. We got another member that just joined us. I guess the only thing I would say, just kind of because I did bring up some of these points, is, you know, in my comments, I wasn't talking about any one piece in particular, but if I was the chief of police, I would not want the report that report that we just got. If my standard is excellence, the best bureau that I can have, I want 2 sentences of our achievements, and I want 3 paragraphs of where we can improve. That would be my personal standard, and that's what I was not seeing in there. And I guess my one suggestion then would be to more clearly put in there your analysis of critique of where they can improve. Because if I just looked through it, it just didn't. It does not have that level of critical analysis that I'm looking for. And so for the officers that are on this call, that are listening, or folks that are like, well, where is this? I want a standard of excellence. And if I'm the police, that's what I would want too. I don't want a report telling me all the great things we do. Where can I improve? How can I? Because I know that there's always room for improvement, even the best athletes, students, whatever it is. So end of comments there. Turn it back over to Andrew if he's ready to close us out. But I'm looking for a high standard of critical analysis.
Could I just respond?
Yep.
Lakiana, I agree that we should all be pushing for excellence, but I think that's, at this point in time, it's more your job and the job of PCCEP than it is the job of the COCO, because we were hired for a specific purpose. And did the city comply with these legal requirements? And, and they were not anywhere near compliance for several years, and we yelled at them. And so I have a lot of ideas. I'm constantly telling police departments ways to improve, but it's not my job in Portland. I mean, I have to be a little careful about how we handle that, is all I'm saying. And that's why there are these opportunities for you guys to really step up and make recommendations. That's just my thought. I don't know.
Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for a robust discussion tonight. And we will have more opportunities to have the compliance officer present. It's on an every 3 months, right? For the duration of the maintenance year. So they'll be back. But just to reiterate what Dr. Rosenbaum mentioned at the top, additional public comment is open now until, what'd you say, Dr. May 8th or the 5th?
I think it's May 8th, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to have that in the PCCEP minutes and on the PCCEP website where you can go to submit additional comments that you might have about the report.
Andrew, I'm sorry, can I say one thing from staff perspective?
Of course.
Thanks everybody for the great meeting. We had not figured out how to set up a way for a sign-in sheet. We will know numbers of participants, but if you're new to the meeting and you want to be sure you're on the emails, please go to our website and sign up that way. Send us an email, we'll get you on our list. Thank you.
We can talk more about this at our next full board meeting, which is scheduled for, let's see here, Tuesday, May 26th, the day after Memorial Day. But you notice that the agenda was shortened slightly tonight. It's 8 o'clock, so it's only been shortened by 30 minutes. But that was done largely due to the difficulty of Zoom meetings and the challenge that it presents to maintaining a sort of momentum. But I think that's something that we can reassess after tonight. Certainly this is a first go at this particular meeting virtually, and we'll try to make improvements as we go along here to make sure that we're getting all the business that needs to get done in this very unique environment. So with that, I wish you all good health and good fortune until we see you at a subcommittee meeting, hopefully, but certainly at the full board meeting next month. Thank you very much, everybody. Peace.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.
Night, everyone.
All right.